All right, let's dive into this explainer, and we're going to completely reframe what we think we know about Robert Greene. For decades, his name has been basically synonymous with that cutthroat corporate shark mentality. But today, we're subverting that. We are throwing out the idea that his work is solely about Machiavellian manipulation. By the time we wrap up, you're going to see his philosophy for what it truly is, a profoundly deep guide to human self-awareness and personal evolution.
Now, this quote right here, it perfectly sets up our entire journey today. We naturally tend to assume that power means having this iron grip on the people around us. But true power, it fundamentally starts with mastering your own internal wiring, not dominating everyone else. If you lack basic self-control, your external influence literally crumbles in an instant.
Section 1. Redefining the meaning of power.
To really get this, we have to strip away the grand illusions of presidents, prime ministers, and politicians. There is a massive divide between the illusion of power and the reality. True power is actually a feeling. Think about your boss's hidden ego for a second. Even the person in charge has massive insecurities. If you lack internal emotional regulation and you just blindly speak your mind and offend them, well, your career is going to stall. Why? Because you lacked internal power.
This is adapted from the civil rights leader Malcolm X, and it brilliantly reveals the tragic flip side of the equation. We always hear the old saying that absolute power corrupts, right? But feeling helpless or lacking any control over your own future, that turns people completely passive-aggressive. That deep, gnawing sense of helplessness corrupts human behavior far more insidiously than having too much power ever could.
Section 2. The psychology of seduction. Shifting from internal control to how we actually interact with the outside world, let's talk about seduction. Greene actually views this as an incredibly high form of power, simply because it naturally lowers resistance rather than forcing compliance. Now, you might think a master seducer is this dominant, untouchable alpha, but it's actually about being completely outer-directed. If you go on a first date agonizing over how your hair looks or what you're going to say next, that's inner-directed insecurity. And trust me, people can smell it a mile away. It inherently pushes us away. Genuine vulnerability, on the other hand, is outer-directed. It lets down defenses and deeply draws us in.
Let's totally redefine a crucial word that we throw around all the time. Seduction isn't about being flawless. In fact, acting completely invulnerable is actually terrifying to other people. It's heavily anti-seductive. Think of a puppy needing care. Showing a wound, being genuinely open to influence, compels others to step in and creates a profound, absolutely undeniable human connection.
Section 3. Mastering the unspoken language.
Let's dive into the actual mechanics of that connection. Because, look, words can easily be faked to flatter you, right? But the physical body simply cannot. These physical tells are the unspoken language of the human animal. We evolved to read these way before we even had spoken language. Learning to quickly spot if someone's feet are pointing to the door, or if their smile is tight instead of lighting up their eyes, that is going to instantly cut through all the fake social pleasantries.
For an absolute masterclass in the sheer power of observation, consider Milton Erickson. This guy was completely paralyzed by polio at just 19 years old. The literally only thing he could move were his eyes. To avoid dying of sheer boredom in his bed, he just started studying the people who visited him. And you know what? He went on to become one of the most masterful psychologists in history, simply because he learned to flawlessly decode this unspoken language.
Section 4. Embracing your dark side.
Let's move inward again to how we conquer our own complex wiring. We have to confront the uncomfortable truth that every single one of us has a shadow self. No one is exempt, and we desperately need to reframe this word right here. We use narcissism strictly as an insult today, don't we? But it actually starts as a vital biological survival tool for children to build self-esteem when they don't get absolute constant attention. The ultimate goal, however, is to evolve it outward into empathy as adults, rather than remaining tragically trapped in toxic self-absorption.
The key takeaway here is dropping the mask of moral superiority. When we repress our shadow, when we pretend we don't have anger or narcissism, we are risking explosive narcissistic rage. Instead, we have got to acknowledge our dark flaws and channel that raw, aggressive energy into productive causes, creative work, or meaningful life tasks.
Section 5. The true path to mastery.
Now, let's look at the biological reality of learning and skill acquisition. And we're going to push back heavily against an internet culture that endlessly demands quick hacks, effortless passion, and overnight success. 10,000. That is the rough estimate of hours required to physically wire your brain's neural pathways for mastery. Think of the legendary Stevie Wonder. Being blind, he was signed to Motown at age 11, and he played the piano for thousands of hours through pure tedium. Today, he can effortlessly improvise because decades of repetitive practice literally rewired his brain.
When you're just starting out, this is the absolute blueprint. For young professionals out there, the advice is crystal clear. Don't chase the giant paycheck at a massive corporate firm where you're just going to be a cog dealing with politics. Take the lower-paying job sitting right next to the entrepreneur at the small florist shop. There, you can observe deeply without your ego getting in the way, and learn directly by doing the work with your own two hands.
So, we've talked extensively about building power and mastery. But what happens when a master of power loses all physical control? What happens when the universe forcefully intervenes? This stark question pivots our narrative and brings us into the final, deeply emotional act of our explainer.
Section 6. Vulnerability and Life's Fragility. In 2018, Robert Greene, the very man who spent his entire life fiercely analyzing, decoding, and writing about power, had his own physical power suddenly and violently stripped away from him. Just look at how quickly everything changes. He finishes an exhausting 5-year book project, followed by a random wasp sting on his neck, a bad reaction to the medication, and finally, a severe stroke behind the wheel of a car. This perfect storm paralyzed the entire left side of his body, ending his ability to swim, mountain bike, or even type.
Connecting right back to our very first point about powerlessness, Greene experienced this misery viscerally. For such a fiercely independent man, relying on others just to eat or button a shirt was absolutely devastating. But you know what? It also gave him a profound, completely unfiltered empathy for the disabled and those living in deep poverty who feel this kind of helplessness every single day of their lives.
To battle the severe depression that inevitably hit a year later when the reality of his permanent condition set in, he systematically deployed these strategies. He grounded himself in Zen meditation. He found deep salvation in the simple, daily act of writing. But most beautifully, he cultivated extreme gratitude for the mundane. He learned to find profound joy simply by looking out a window and watching a stranger effortlessly walk their dog down the street.
Ultimately, the real takeaway from Robert Greene's life's work isn't about crushing your enemies in a boardroom or pulling political strings. Not at all. It is deeply realizing that beneath the endless social theater and those masks we all wear every day, we are profoundly vulnerable creatures who must fiercely appreciate every fleeting moment we have on this earth.
I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Look at your own life task, reflect on your own shadows, and ask yourself what true foundation of inner power you are actually building right now. If the world stripped away your status and your physical abilities tomorrow, who would you really be? Take that question with you today.